What's my name?
Jon Snow?
And why is my surname Snow?
Because you're a bastard from the north.
Welcome back, everyone. Big surprise, Warner Brothers and HBO announced that they're doing a Game of Thrones movie, so we'll explain what's going on. I know there's a lot of theories. They didn't say exactly what it's going to be about, but we have a couple good ideas of what it's going to be. I know everybody's clamoring for them to redo the end of original Game of Thrones. Dan and Dave did want to turn Season 8 into 3 movies. Originally, they were going to do it as a trilogy of movies instead of a regular season of TV. HBO said, hard pass, we don't care about theatrical movies. But some of you might remember that HBO has put Game of Thrones in movie theaters previously, airing a couple episodes that you could go see in an actual theater. So this isn't the first time that Game of Thrones will be in movie theaters. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. Of course, I will do whatever they wind up releasing for this Game of Thrones movie, and we do have Night of the Seven Kingdoms episodes starting next year. I've already done a couple trailer videos for that, so I'll link them at the end of this. We'll get another trailer for that really soon, too. House of the Dragon Season 3 isn't going to release until 2026, so like Night of the Seven Kingdoms is filling the gaps between years until we eventually get that Aegon's Conquest TV series, meaning that that's probably not going to be one of the movies. I know everybody would love to see an Aegon's Conquest movie. Really, you'd need about 3 movies to do justice to that, and even then you'd be cutting out a ton of stuff. Like, whatever they wind up doing for this Game of Thrones movie, they will have to be the speedrun version of that story, which is one of the really big downsides and one of the other big reasons why HBO has never previously had an interest in doing an actual regular theatrical Game of Thrones movie. And right after I made this video, I realized that almost 11 years ago, I did a Game of Thrones movie video because at the time, right before Season 4 aired, George R. R. Martin was talking about Game of Thrones movies, so I'll post a link for that down in the description below. Let me know in the comments if you were watching my channel way back before Season 4. One of the movies that George R. R. Martin was talking about at that time, like this is before Season 4, was a Dunk and Egg movie. We're literally going to be watching episodes of that TV series next year. So probably the first real big, really solid idea that everybody's been asking for that would be easy for them to do in a relatively limited type of story would be Robert's Rebellion. Everybody's been clamoring for that since the original series ended. When they announced that they were doing like 7, 8 different spin-offs and prequels, one of the biggest requested stories was Robert's Rebellion because they only briefly touched on it and referenced it during the original series, but it's so meaningful for those characters in the events of the series. And you have to think that they're trying to go for something that they feel like everybody is familiar enough with that it will get them into movie theaters, meaning that it will probably have some connection with the original characters that everybody remembers and loves. It would also be an excuse to bring some of those characters back too, if you want to use them for voiceover or use them for flash forwards or references. They'd just be an easy way to, say, bring Kit Harington back as a version of Jon Snow to connect things across the timeline, or Daenerys, for instance, or even the Three-Eyed Raven or Bran Stark, any of the other characters that are important during different parts of the timeline, younger versions of the characters like Ned Stark, Robert Baratheon, all the characters that we saw during the first couple of seasons of the original show before they were killed off. Especially Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. They would basically be some of the main characters along with a young Robert Baratheon, young Ned Stark. It would also be really easy to fit the movie into the larger Game of Thrones timeline when it eventually moves to HBO and just lives there for the rest of time, like all the other Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon prequel series too. Now, there's a version of this where they do Robert's Rebellion as a single 3-hour movie, like 3.5-hour movie or however long you want to go. Please make it a 5-hour movie. I would love to see a 5-hour version of Robert's Rebellion. Or they probably pick the path of sanity and do it as 2 or 3 movies, praying that they don't go full Hobbit with it. Like The Hobbit is an example of a story that did not need to be 3 movies, but Robert's Rebellion just has way more stuff going on during that. It's just like a bigger part of the timeline than The Hobbit was. This also means George R. R. Martin would probably be a much bigger part of the actual writer's room of the movie, helping them craft those things in a bigger way than he was on House of the Dragon in the original series. Like, he's a much bigger part of actually writing House of the Dragon stuff than he was on the original Game of Thrones series. The movie would require even more of his attention, but because we're talking like 3 to 6 potential hours, it'd be much easier for him to help shepherd that without just completely sidelining all of his other work on House of the Dragon, the other prequels, or even finishing Winds of Winter.
Well, funny you should ask. Let me get my map.
This is also probably the reason why he deleted his really salty blog post complaining about House of the Dragon. Like, oh, by the way, they're probably going to pay me a big dump truck of money to help them with this Game of Thrones movie. The speedrun version of Robert's Rebellion, when they do it as like a single movie, would have to start with like a brief flashback. House of the Dragon Season 1, Episode 1, good example, where they use sort of like a small moment at the beginning to set things up in the timeline and explain what's going on. Explain how Aerys II became the Mad King. He wasn't mad originally. He had all the signs of being a very good king. Everybody loved him earlier in his life. He only started to degenerate later in life due to a couple key events. All that inbreeding and sister-wiving didn't help over all those years. Then the actual story of the movie would have to start with the tourney at Harrenhal, just because that's such a big event. Rhaegar Targaryen meets Lyanna Stark, the Night of the Laughing Tree. They do that. Then they run off to get married eventually. Rickard Stark, Brandon Stark, being executed by the Mad King, calling for Ned Stark's head, Robert Baratheon's head's next, leading to the actual beginning of the fighting. It's up like the actual rebellion. They do a quick speedrun version of a couple of the biggest battles and just focus the entire third act of the movie around the sack of King's Landing and then the aftermath during Act 4. Like we see Jaime Lannister killing the Mad King, Robert Baratheon, Ned Stark, their forces taking King's Landing with Jaime's help, opening the gates. We get that scene of Ned Stark finding Jaime Lannister standing over the Mad King's body near the Iron Throne, which they talked about during Season 1 of the original show. We get the scene of Robert Baratheon killing Rhaegar at the Trident, and just as he's dying, whispering Lyanna Stark, Jon Snow's name, who he had named Aegon, and it was all about the prince who was promised, like he thought that Jon Snow was the culmination of the prince who was promised. And remember, that was a really big deal for Rhaegar, the actual prophecy itself, so that would be like a big through line through the movie, the actual prophecy and his relationship, like his personal feelings towards Lyanna Stark. The prophecy and his relationship are basically like the whole inciting thing that set everything in motion at the beginning of that. Then we see Ned Stark coming to the Tower of Joy, finding Jon Snow being born, and get those events setting up the original Game of Thrones series, also showing us Daenerys' birth in the aftermath as well too. She was born a little after Jon Snow. Like Jon Snow was born right after Robert's Rebellion finished in the aftermath in 283 AC. Daenerys wasn't born until 284 AC. And they basically end the movie with the births of those two people. Another big question people will raise about this too, will they include Bran Stark standing around watching this all go down in the background? Like, is he going to actually show up? Because we actually saw him do that during the original show. Maybe they let him have some kind of voiceover narration, or the Three-Eyed Raven. Like, you can skip Bran and just do the Three-Eyed Raven narrating some of these events, setting things up. And because I don't see them doing a big Game of Thrones movie, particularly one that has any kind of connection, even a small one, to the original show without White Walkers, they'd have some kind of reference to the Night King in the prophecy, the prince who was promised. Like I said, the prophecy would probably serve as like a big through line through the movie, in addition to Rhaegar and Lyanna's actual relationship. Like that becomes the driving force that pushes everything through. Like all the crazy things that happen are a result of those two things. Their relationship in the prophecy itself, and Rhaegar's belief in it, and everything that it causes him to do. Kind of like a Romeo and Juliet situation, like a doomed romance, doomed love affair. Now, if they choose the path of sanity and they do it as 2 or 3 movies, give themselves like a little more breathing room to actually tell the story. They don't have to speedrun it quite so much. They just add more of the major battles, more of Rhaegar and Lyanna's backstory, what they were actually doing the time they took off, mostly getting freaky, but there was also some other stuff going on there too. More backstory at the beginning, before the tourney at Harrenhal, the bigger lead up for more character development on the Mad King to make him an even bigger, more tragic villain of the actual story. More on the prophecy of the prince who was promised, like they dig deeper into Rhaegar learning about the prophecy for the first time in Aegon's Valyrian dagger, and why that became such an important thing for him, because they're using the prophecies as big through line through all the different prequel series. Why wouldn't they also do that during the movie? A couple of the other really biggest movie-worthy things that they could do in a relatively limited story like Aegon's Conquest, I don't think that they will do, like I said, because they're already developing that for a regular TV series with multiple seasons, so they're not going to cannibalize that for a single movie. There's the Doom of Valyria, which is like one of the other biggest events that we've never seen, and there were talks about them doing an animated prequel for that show, like doing it as an animated show, but it's been a couple years since George R. R. Martin has talked about that. They could always pivot and make that a live-action single movie. That would probably be them just showing Daenerys the Dreamer having her dragon dream of the Doom, showing a quick flashback at the beginning of the movie to explain the rise of the Valyrian Freehold, how they tamed dragons, and more of the circumstances that led to the actual Doom. There are both the geological reasons, like practical reasons, and magical reasons for why the Doom happened. Fun fact, during the original run of Game of Thrones, Jon Snow, Kit Harington actually starred in the Pompeii movie, which is not unlike the Doom of Valyria with the exploding volcano destroying the civilization. The only bad part about that was not a good movie. Like, love Kit Harington, but it was not a good movie. But in a movie version of the Doom, they would just show the actual Targaryens arriving at Dragonstone, Aegon bringing Balerion the Black Dread and their other dragons, dragon eggs. I believe there were 5 dragons that he originally brought from ancient Valyria, including Balerion the Black Dread, but he was the only dragon to survive long into the future. The other dragons like Vhagar, Meraxes were actually hatched on Dragonstone. There's a lot of Valyrian culture that I think they're going to get into on Aegon's Conquest series, just because there's so much more Targaryen history, Valyrian history that was around during that period that was eventually slowly lost over time with the fall of the Targaryen family, particularly after the current events of House of the Dragon right now with the death of the dragons. House of the Dragon, the stuff that we're watching right now, is really like the beginning of the end of their family, like the downfall of their family, culminating in the events of the original show with Daenerys and Jon Snow being the only remaining Targaryens next to Maester Aemond. Technically, the Three-Eyed Raven was also Targaryen bastard, so you could actually include him in that, but he did die before the final couple seasons along with Maester Aemond. So really at the end, Jon Snow and Daenerys were the only 2 real Targaryens that could call themselves Targaryens. There's a couple other really big events that they could do, like the rise of the Valyrian Freehold with crazy numbers of dragons, like way more time with the rise of the Freehold, but that just feels a little too divorced from the original known characters that HBO seems so invested in. Like right now, Warner Brothers is trying to capitalize on the most popular aspects of the Game of Thrones universe, and that really is still the original show, those original characters. Which is why Robert's Rebellion is probably their strongest idea to go with. So for example, they're not going to pick like a movie set in the Far East like E.T. or like some ancient period. Like there's a lot of really cool events in the ancient history of the world of Game of Thrones. But a lot of that stuff just feels too far away from where HBO and Warner Bros. Are trying to focus their attention in the timeline, which is much closer to the original show. They could always do a movie version of the First Long Night or the original war between the First Men and the Children of the Forest that led to the First Long Night. Like they could show the circumstances of how all that went down. When it comes to stuff like the Blackfire Rebellions, I think they're going to do that as like another era of House of the Dragon seasons at some future point, like House of the Dragon Season 5, but they changed the title to Season 1 and just call it House of the Dragon Blackfire Rebellion Season 1. Like I said, a long time ago, Dan and Dave originally planned to do Season 8 as a trilogy of movies instead. The reason why HBO didn't want to do that is because they don't care about theatrical. They just care about driving more subscribers to their cable channel, to their now streaming service. At the time, the streaming service was called HBO Now. Long after Game of Thrones ended, they rolled that into what became HBO Max, which is now Max. A lot of craziness happened in the years after Game of Thrones ended. The funny thing about this, though, the real reason why HBO is letting them do a Game of Thrones movie is because Warner Brothers owns HBO and they can tell HBO, we're going to make a Game of Thrones movie. We don't care whether you're involved or not. So it's not that HBO wants to make a Game of Thrones movie, it's that Warner Brothers wants to make a Game of Thrones movie and they're making HBO do this. HBO still does not care about theatrical movies, but Warner Brothers is known as a more theatrical company. They care about movie theater profits, and their profits are not doing so great. Like if you've been reading the news, Warner Brothers not doing so great financially right now. So that's why they're really trying to play all their biggest hits, like they're doing the reboot of the Harry Potter TV series on HBO. Now they're using all their most popular properties to try and get people back into theaters, and Game of Thrones is just like one of the ideas, like, hey, people love Game of Thrones, that was really popular back in the day, that earned us hundreds of millions of dollars, why don't we do a movie based on that? But this is the people at Warner Brothers doing this, not the people at HBO starting all this. So it does kind of feel like a bit of a cash grab, like if you have a really solid idea for a story, why not just do that as another TV series, which is what HBO would normally do. So everybody let me know in the comments, do you like the idea of them doing a Game of Thrones movie? And if it does mean them burning an idea that they would have originally done as a TV series, what do you want that movie to be about? Maybe if we're lucky and things go well for them, they'll do like a 2-movie version and they won't completely cannibalize Robert's Rebellion or like one of the other big stories across the timeline. The other big reminder, too, is that they just announced that they started development, meaning that we're not going to see this movie till 2027 at the earliest, probably not till 2028. Meaning that by the time the movie comes, we'll already be watching that Aegon's Conquest series. Like Aegon's Conquest Season 1 will have come and gone already. But in related good news, we will be getting a new trailer for Night of the Seven Kingdoms in the next few months. I'll do all the videos for that as soon as they start releasing more footage, and I'll be doing regular episode videos just like I do for all the other House of the Dragon, original Game of Thrones series. Probably not going to start seeing footage for House of the Dragon Season 3 till later next year just because they have not started filming it yet. I've already done a couple big Season 3 videos, like that video about George R. R. Martin what his complaints were about House of the Dragon. The tea he spilled was actually pretty funny. Make sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss any of this stuff. Click here for my Night of the Seven Kingdoms trailer video, and click here for all my House of the Dragon Season 3 videos in my Season 2 episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.